Okay, hi folks. You're very welcome to Forte's business webinar about accelerate your career and leadership lessons in how to get promoted. I think people are joining right now. So as you're joining, we're just going to kick off. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really thrilled to have you with us. So my name is Breach Burke, and I am with Forte Institute since last year. I've over 20 years experience as an executive coach, and I work with customers like Google and Microsoft and LinkedIn. And one of the things when I joined Forte, folks, was I really wanted to connect with our business audience and share some insights from coaching and introduce and bring on board some of our really long-term relationships, long-term customers and clients to help share some nuggets of information for people out there. So we're delighted to have you with us, and some of the things we talked about in terms of the outcomes from this webinar, which I really hope you get a chance to take some tips away for yourselves and maybe share with others in your life as well, is when Tommy and I, Tommy Geary, is our fabulous guest today. So when Tommy and I were talking about the webinar, we talked about things that we both noticed. And one of the things Tommy had said that he got often asked was, how do people break through to the next level? And I've certainly seen this in executive coaching over 2 decades now. How do people go from one level to the next level? So there are kind of critical career inflection points, and in your organization, as many organizations have a very clear structure around this. And so we want to tap into that and share some information with you. We also want to help you understand, like, how does that promotion process work? And really critically, I suppose the big takeaway is around your own self-awareness. So what are the tickets to entry at each level, and how do you operate at that level? So how can you develop your awareness around what you have and where the gaps might be? How do you fill those gaps? So those are the kinds of things we really want to share with you folks today. And in terms of a bit of housekeeping, we're asking you maybe to keep video off because it does distract a little bit. We have everybody on mute. You can unmute if you want, and you can do that if you want to ask a question in the middle of it, or you'll see there's a chat feature on your toolbar. So you can use chat to pose a question to me or everyone, and I'll keep an eye on the questions and ask Tommy the questions for the group. So feel free to do that. And right at the end, we just have a goodie for you for today, for joining us today. Just delighted to have you here. This is a new thing we're doing in Forte, so we love the feedback, and we want to say thanks for joining us and giving us time today. So to introduce Tommy, you're so welcome. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thanks very much, Breed. That's great. Great to be here. Delighted.
So Tommy is Senior Vice President of Global Sales Operation with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And Tommy has been a long-standing, we have a long-standing relationship. And my earliest memory of you, Tommy, was when we met in the 1990s. And I was providing training for Dell. And we were doing a presentation skills course. And folks, I remember, like, even back then, Tommy stood out because he came to a presentation skills course, which was all about preparing to deliver your program or your course or your presentation. And he was at the time an engineering manager before this executive director role you can see that he had in Dell. And he came on the course, and everybody was completely shocked when Tommy's presentation was about the durability of the laptop, and he picked up a jug of water and poured it all over the laptop. And thankfully, the laptop was still working at the input, but I just remember him standing out. And then later on, was very lucky to get to work with Tommy, and we've stayed in touch over the last couple of years, decades actually, Tommy. And so delighted to have him join us, because one of the things I have seen in Tommy is his incredible progression and acceleration of his career, not without occasional ups and downs at times, but he's certainly someone who has such vast experience in this, that I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get a little bit of time with Tommy to share some insights with people who are wondering about how can I progress my career. So with that, Tommy, I would love to invite you to begin to tell us some of the kind of key points in your career, and how you, I suppose, the kind of standout moments in your career to share with the group, and the kind of lessons you'd share with us then arising from that.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for everyone joining us here today. I'm delighted to spend some time with you, and hopefully you'll have some questions to ask or even thoughts to share. First of all, I would just say huge thanks to Breed. I know her for a long time, as she said, but I certainly wouldn't have achieved this career without her. and without the use of the Forte tool, which we both used throughout our relationship. But at times I felt Breed was not only reading my mind, but sometimes the mind of my boss. And that was hugely helpful when I was trying to figure out, hey, how can I be a success with my boss? And she would tell me exactly what they were thinking. And it was very, very different to how I was perceiving things. So can't say enough about how fantastic Breed is. And I hope you get a chance to work with her. So let me go through this kind of 5 top of mind things that I thought I'd share with you today. If we go to the next slide. The first one I would probably start with is SMART goals. And, if I think back on my career, a couple of things. One is I would say I probably had a bit of an accidental career for the first number of years, maybe the first 10, 15 years. And what I mean by that is, if you had said to me 10 years previous, where do you think you'll be in 10 years' time? I would have had no real clue. I went from job to job and I got some promotions along the way and everything went well. But I ended up in kind of a business type role and I, graduated as an engineer. So again, good things happened, but it didn't really have a path or a plan. So at a point in time, I started to do some goal setting with Breed, and that was a huge breakthrough for me. And so I think that is something that you should kind of think about. And I'll talk more about it in a second. If I think about, my career, probably just like you, there's been ups and downs. You've had promotions already. You're already successful, but maybe you want more. And I can remember back to the one promotion that I really, really struggled with. I did pretty well early on, and then I started to hit a wall at this kind of executive director promotion. It was almost like I was climbing steps of the stairs all the way up to that point. And then I almost had to leap 5 steps of the stairs in one go. And they weren't making that easy for any of us. They were giving us lots of feedback, but there was very, very few making it from the group of potential promotees to actually achieving that goal. And for me, I remember feeling that was a really, really tough time. And it was around the time I started working with Breed, and I thought we worked on that. We got some insights that really, really helped me along the way. And one of these was around setting goals. And so for me, when I thought about goals, I realized that I had actually been setting goals in my head previously, but had never written them down. And there is a study that shows that people who write down goals are going to be far more successful than those who don't. But for me, it worked. And I guess, one of the key things today is you've got to find what works with your style, your approach. And for me, it became something that was very, very useful for the last roughly kind of 15 years or so, and really, really helped me achieve what I wanted to achieve. I can actually show you the goals that I set back in 2006. Breed and I were looking back as we prepared for this. And I think this was one of my first goal setting exercises here. So, it's not pretty, a simple template, just like with the goal and a timeline. And as I said, I did this in 2006. But the reason I wrote down the other items at the beginning of this table was because I felt in my own head, those were goals I had set myself earlier on in my life, and luckily enough was able to achieve them. And then I came to 2006, and as I said, I was struggling to kind of make that next step, and trying to figure out where to go from here. The great news is that I was able to achieve all of the goals on this except one. That second last one I'm still working on, around what happens next after I finish with Hewlett Packard Enterprise and I want to do something in a kind of let's call it a semi-retirement mode. But I was delighted to say that I managed to achieve a promotion to VP. I didn't do it by 2009. I did it by 2012. But I made senior VP by 2014. And so I'm now probably in the lucky enough position that I'm age 48, and if I wanted to, I could retire from full-time work. So slightly ahead of plan on that last goal, which for me was always in my head from early on. And as I get closer to it, who knows, maybe I'll just decide, hey, that's an option for me, but I don't want to go there just yet. But for me, this was a huge thing that made a change. And what you'll see is that these goals happened, but they didn't quite happen in exactly the same way that I thought it would. So subsequent versions of this clarified the VP role that I wanted to achieve, which was global sales operations. I ended up becoming senior VP of global sales operations with a different company in a different country, but I got there, right? Something I had on one of these goal setting things was to have my forever home by the lake, right? And now we sit in a home by the lake. And what I found was, once I wrote this thing down, it was like a contract in my head. I didn't have to look at this every day, but the minute I wrote it down, it became something I had to do. And I didn't feel pressure by it, but it just kind of guided me on a path. And if you can imagine a path from kind of bottom left to top right, you know, a lovely straight line that we would like our careers to follow, and they never do. The situation is you kind of go off track, you know, above or below that line, and you can go to a very, very different place. I found with goal setting, what happened was it dragged me back to that line every time. And so I ended up being able to achieve what I wanted to achieve in a kind of a quicker manner than before, because I was putting all my energies into very simple, kind of straightforward, small number of critical goals versus trying to achieve too much and becoming a little bit scattered in my approach. So that would be the first thing I would say that that was really, really helpful for me on SMART goals. So if we go back to the 5 points again. Yes, sorry, Bree, do you want to say something?
Tommy, I just wanted to, for the benefit of people listening as well, to say that I think things that struck me about this was the absolute best example and case study. And I think we both had a kind of wow moment when you dug this out and found it. It's I can totally validate it comes from a 2006 piece of work that you did, and that you kept it, and that we both felt like, wow, it's such a brilliant example, I felt, of after years and years of talking about the power of goal setting to people, that you see how well you did it, and that it stood the test of time. And as you say, the route from goal, from where you are right now to where you want to be, you don't know what that route is going to be. You can't define exactly what that route is going to be. But this was such an incredible example of, like folks yesterday, when Tommy sent this to me and reminded me about it, we laughed about the house on the lake. It was the house on the lake or the golf course, and that's what you have now. And it's just unbelievable that all these things happened, and it was because you committed it to paper. And so whatever the goal is, I think it's such value in writing, absolutely writing it out. And I wouldn't want to diminish the fact that there were times when you had some tough choices to make for you and your family, and there's always the whole personal dynamic going on, obviously, as well. But even just to see the actuality of this is thank you for sharing it, and for letting us share it with other people today, because it's incredible. It feels like a piece of scientific empirical research, like set goals and you will get, and it's like, okay, QED proven.
And it's really interesting, because when I speak with people, they're looking to get to the next level, and we chat about goal setting, and they don't really know where to start. And I felt the same. I absolutely felt the same. This list did not come easily or quickly. It required, and I was lucky enough to be working with Breed, so it evolved. But at a point, it kind of, there was some clarity, and I did sit down with my wife. We got married in 2005, so we were already married. Breed had me do an exercise, which was kind of funny. She said, I want you to draw a picture of your 70th birthday. Where will you be? Who will be at that party? And I went, the first reaction I had was, well, first of all, I can't draw, so this is not going to be good. But I drew the picture, and again, I drew the house by the lake, and I started to put down people there, which was really interesting, because you realize some of the people you're working with today probably won't be the ones you're with at your 70th birthday. But it really did focus the mind, and I shared it with my wife, and I said, hey, what kind of picture would you draw? And she drew the picture of a pig, and her sitting on the back of the pig with a glass of wine. So that was her version of, I guess, keeping me grounded. She wanted to be on the pig's back. That was how she did it. But you need someone with you who's supportive and who has common goals. And for me, what she was just a phenomenal supporter, and made a lot of sacrifices along the way. Gave up her job and is minding the kids. She moved to the US with us. I'll tell you two quick examples of kind of sacrifices I made along the way. Back around 2004, I think I went and had a discussion with one of the senior leaders, and I said, can I have a chat with you? I'd love some advice. I'm thinking about the next job, and really admire how you operate. Is there any kind of particular roles that you might have coming up in the next few months that you might consider me for? And the guy said, well, funny you should say that. I have an open role for a position in the Netherlands based in Amsterdam. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, I'd love to hire you. Could you be there on Monday? And this was Wednesday. And I said, oh my God, well, I'm going to Austin, Texas on next week. And he said, okay, that's okay. We can work around it. The following Monday to start will be okay. So I said to him, okay, sign me up. And I came back and I told my girlfriend, and she went, you're moving to Amsterdam and you haven't even spoken to me about this. And so those were the stupid things I did back then. I would not do now. But, what was great about that was we made the move. She stayed in Ireland, came over and back. She would say it was it was the reason I understood how much I needed her in my life. And we got married in 2005 shortly after that. So it was, but again, it was a big sacrifice. A second one was I was in the company in HP at the time, and they wanted me to move to the US, and I had only been with the company about a year. So I was quite happy doing this job from Europe, and my wife did not want to move. So they asked me to come over for some interviews, and I went over there with the strict purpose of, how do I say no without screwing up my career? And, I went through all these different reasons, and the guy who wanted to hire me was saying, well, yeah, we can fix that, and we can fix that, and we can fix that. And then he said, I'd like you to meet the CEO. And I just kind of shook my head and was going, this isn't going as well as I planned. I called my wife back home, and she said, oh my God, you're meeting the CEO. And I said, yeah, I'm going to try. And so I went in to meet the CEO and was talking about all the challenges, and my wife had some issues, and she said, no problem, let me speak to your wife. I'd happily meet with her. And so I came out of that meeting going, oh no, rang my wife. And I said, you have a one-on-one with Meg Whitman, so you can tell her that we're not going. And so she kind of groaned, and like about a few weeks later, we were on a plane going to the US, and it was one of the greatest things we've ever done as a family. Phenomenal for our kids who were small back then. But again, it shows you, I guess, sacrifices and maybe risks. Some of them work out, some of them don't, but in general, they've tended to work out for me. But they're just a couple of examples of personal stories around. Sometimes when you ask for something, it can be difficult and you better be prepared. And then other times stuff gets thrown at you, which can be a great opportunity, but might not be right timing. And what do you do? What do you do? So anyway, yeah.
We have a question, as just one of the audience are wondering, did you share this? Who else did you share this with in 2006 for professional accountability?
Yeah, it was only really with Breed and my wife. It was really just three of us that knew about this. I would have obviously spoken to my boss at the time about wanting to be promoted, something like that, but I wouldn't have gone into any of this level of detail at all. So it was very much a tight-knit thing. Very important that my wife was bought in, and then Breed, because we were working together, she was coaching me, and we needed to go figure out what were the actions that were going to take us to the next step. So we didn't want to waste any effort doing things that weren't going to lead to this goal setting, and that's why I think it was so effective.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay,
so
feel free to pose questions, folks. Anything at all that Tommy's saying that you want to hear something more specific on?
Let me jump to the bottom one here for a second about promotion game. And for me, I think this is a really, really important one, because when I speak to people who come and say, hey, I would love to get promoted, I say, do you understand what it takes to get promoted? And they're not quite sure, right? And I'm lucky enough now to have been on both sides of the fence. In other words, wanting to be promoted and then actually being in the meetings where we decide who gets promoted. And I have to say, in a lot of big companies where you folks are, the process is very, very similar. So you obviously have to have a real advocate in your boss. Your direct boss has to be fighting your case, because usually these meetings, when they decide on who's getting promoted, it's a group of maybe 10 people, your boss, their peers, their boss, and they're the decision makers. And so the first thing you got to say is, okay, if they're deciding on whether I get promoted or not, do I even know these people? Are they going to be in that room saying positive things about me, negative things about me, or I just don't know who Tommy is? So, that was one of the learnings for me. And subsequently, I came up with kind of an approach to networking, which did not come easily for me. I don't think it comes easily for many people. But what I did was decided on a number of key people in the organization that I felt were decision makers about my career. And I said two things. I was going to rate it out of 10. How well do they know me? So let's pick 8 people. How well do each of those 8 know me? And out of 10, how highly do they rate me? And that was a wide eye opener, because I might have come back with the conclusion, wow, 2 people really know me well, 2 people know me somewhat, and then the others don't know me at all. And then the folks that do know me, what do they really think about me? Maybe I'm a 6 or 7 out of 10. And then I'm going, these are the guys who are going to decide on whether I get promoted or not. Wow. It was a kind of a breakthrough moment for me. I think a second thing that I've seen, again, both sides of the fence, is I've been in some of these meetings where we're talking about promoting someone, and I actually ended up mentoring a particular individual, having just spoken about them in this promotion meeting. And a few development areas popped up as part of the promotion discussion, and the person wasn't promoted. And subsequently, when I spoke to them in the mentoring session, I said, so what did your manager tell you after the promotion session? And they said, well, look, that I was very highly thought of. I should just keep doing the same things I'm doing, and then maybe next year I might get there. And to be totally honest with you, that really, really frustrated me. I strongly believe in truth telling and receiving feedback, and for us as individuals, really being open to receiving that feedback, no matter how harsh, maybe how false you might feel it is, but getting that feedback that you can work on something. So when you don't get promoted, there is always a reason. You were still going to be a star because you're in that consideration. The reason might be, hey, you only got promoted 6 months ago. We're not going to promote you again that quickly. That could be the reason. It could be, and I've seen this happen, someone shows up late for a meeting, and in that promotion discussion, people ask for comments about the individual, and they're saying, well, I had a meeting last week and that person was late. I'm not sure how committed they are. And then someone else pops up and go, yeah, I sent them an email. They took like 2 days to reply to me. And all of a sudden, this spiraling negative feedback happens, and the person doesn't get promoted. The manager should be coming back saying to the person, hey, listen, they've built up a perception about you that you're not on your game here around meeting attendance, emails, this kind of smaller stuff. But often that doesn't happen. So for me, I think it's really, really important to know how the game works, and then you choose whether you want to be part of that game. I would say, the comment I made about networking earlier, when I speak to certain people, that is the worst thing I could have asked them to do in their lives almost. They just dread it. And their feeling is, look, if I just put in an extra hour a day, I'll get promoted next time. The fact of the matter was, it didn't matter if they worked 80 or 100 hours a week. It wasn't going to get them promoted. That wasn't what was holding them back. And I said to them, you know what, that's not the game here. If you really want to get promoted, I'm going to give you a challenge. So those people we've identified who are the decision makers here, try to get a 30-minute discussion with those people over the next 3 months. Let's say 4 people. That's 2 hours out of their lives. They would have far preferred to do 2, 3, 4 hours extra work every single day for those 3 months than have to face that 4 multiplied by half-hour conversations. So, that it's difficult. And then if you realize that is a problem and a weakness for you, fine, then go get help. But understanding that promotion game is really, really key. It's going to get you promoted much faster. And you can choose to not play the game, but then don't be disappointed if you don't get promoted. If you choose to play the game, throw yourself fully into it, understand the ins and outs of it, and make it work for you. And you'll be differentiated versus the crowd. So that one for me is a big one as well.
Yeah, this is a great point. And it's something, Tommy, that I've point you just made about the assigning time for those 30-minute meetings, I see that as a big obstacle for a lot of people. And I think the thing that gets in the way, or at least the thing I hear, is that I'm setting up 30 minutes for what? Like, it's obvious that I'm doing this to promote myself, and that feels really uncomfortable. And I'm really uncomfortable doing kind of small talk. And I think with a good ally, with a good manager, support, or coach, you can have a conversation about how you do that one-on-one. Because I think your point is brilliant. People often choose to do 3 or 4 hours of work that they did last month than set up these one-on-ones with people that they feel terrible about appearing to be promoting themselves. And that, if you're in big organizations, in companies like the ones you've worked in, that is a kind of ticket to entry. You have to overcome that, and you have to work out how to do it. And as you say, or else don't play the game. Either play it or play it.
So I learned a great lesson here from a guy who I worked for. This is when I had just recently joined HP, which is about 7 years ago. So it tells you I was still making tons of mistakes, particularly around networking. I used to go in and I might talk to a sales leader, for example, who was an influential person. And my conversation would be all around, what can we do to help his organization? And he'd kind of rattle his brains and go, well, you could clearly tell he doesn't know the ins and outs of my business, what I do. But he'd start to try and find things that were wrong. And then he'd talk about that. And then I'd say, is there anything else? And he would end up scratching the surface, trying to find some problems with my area. And it became a totally spiraling negative conversation. I thought I was doing the right thing by talking about something that would be relevant to him and talking about how my team could help him achieve more, but it didn't come across like that. I then sat with my boss in a meeting, and he had a similar session with a sales leader. He went in and said, hey, how's business? And the sales leader went off and spoke for 10 minutes about the business, what they were doing, and this was great, and that was great. And hey, how's the competition? Who's your biggest? How's Lenovo doing these days? They went off and they talked about that. And hey, any kind of advice for me at the moment? And people who are in senior positions, most of them have big egos. So play to the ego. They can dominate that conversation for 95% of the talk time, and it will be mostly about them. They will come away feeling great about that meeting. You will have asked them about advice. You'll have said, hey, I love the way you do this. Can you tell me more about it? They leave that meeting feeling great about themselves. They leave that meeting feeling great about you. That is the most important thing. Again, that's an approach to networking. It doesn't always have to be, there must be almost like a goal to this meeting. What am I going to achieve? There's an outcome. It's actually just building the relationships. And so that was a lesson I learned, and I've used many, many times over. And the last thing I will say on this is, when you ask these senior leaders, I have never had one that said no to spending a little bit of time with me, and I usually couch it in just, any chance I could have a few minutes to pick your brain. I'd love some advice. I'm trying to progress my career. You've obviously been a great success. Any chance I could get some time with you, even 10 minutes. They never say no. And I don't go in and say, I want to talk to you about this particular project that's important. That's what people make the mistake of. They think they have to have a reason to talk. Just ask for advice. Okay,
that's great advice, actually, and it answers one of the questions there from the audience about, do you go to your sponsors and explain explicitly, I want to get promoted? But the way you've put that, that's great advice. So you're saying, I'd like advice. You've been successful. I'd love some time to talk to you. And that's completely acceptable.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely fine to be open about the goal. I think what you don't want to do is come across as being obsessed with the promotion, and that's the be all and end all. But, a lot of it can be couched in your self-development as much as talking about the promotion. But let me touch on a couple of other points quickly, and then we might go to team development. So right-hand man or right-hand woman, this one served me well very, very early in my career. And one of the things that I found I needed was to be close to my boss. In other words, have a great relationship with my boss and be their kind of right-hand person. What I found with doing that, it was, in order to achieve that, you needed to kind of know all the other functions that your boss managed. You need to know what those people did, what the issues were. And, slowly but surely, I found myself tuning in and saying, how would my boss handle this issue? And watching them handling it and seeing the issue play out into a solution and going, wow, I would have done something totally different and my boss was right. And then that keeps progressing and you realize, hey, I've disagreed with my boss on this one in my own head. And I think my way would have been better. And what you find is that your boss goes out sick or on vacation and you're left in charge. Your boss moves to another role. They go, who could do this? You're in the position. Promotion happens really, really quickly. I got promoted so many times quickly on that particular point. The other one I want to touch on briefly is self-awareness. And I think this is really, really important. Again, Breed helped me with this through lots of different tools. We used Forte extensively, which I found phenomenal. But we did Myers-Briggs, we did emotional intelligence, we did Hogan, we did a bunch of other things. And it's the themes you're looking for and a baseline. So how am I doing today? What are my core strengths and weaknesses? What are the things I need to work on? That was really, really helpful. And again, that can feed straight into your goal setting. And it can also feed into just how you want to operate, experiment, chop and change things. And be telling people that you're trying this. Talk to your boss and say, look, I'm trying to be more outgoing. I'm trying to speak more in meetings. Can you give me feedback if you find me sitting in a corner not saying anything? So you can talk to folks about self-awareness and really self-development. I think building that plan is so important. And again, that's something I worked really, really extensively with Breed on, and finding those few things to go work on. And once you'd fixed one or two things, then you moved on to the next couple of things to keep driving you forward.
Yeah, I think that's something we can't stop underestimating, is that the power of learning more and more and more about yourself. And there's just such a range of feedback mechanisms. There's such a range of self-awareness tools that any opportunity you get to take it. You'll learn something, maybe a little nugget about yourself. And understanding yourself then as a leader, understanding even how you helps you develop a more authentic style of management and leadership. And that's pretty crucial as well, rather than, of course, you have to fit into your organizational competencies, the definitions of leadership that your organization promotes. At the same time, really understanding how you tick, how you operate, what you excel at, and being a person who solicits feedback, particularly as you get more senior. As you get more senior, there's less opportunities, I think, sometimes to receive feedback. So you sometimes have to create that. And I think anything that you get a chance to do to continue to learn about yourself and enhance your self-awareness is always worth saying yes to and prioritizing.
And I'll give you one short story. Where I started was that stairs analogy, jumping the 5 steps for that particular promotion that proved to be very, very difficult, but eventually got there a few years into the process. We had development interviews with the senior executives in Europe at the time, and they give you a report with feedback. And the feedback, and the reason I didn't get promoted was I had poor command skills. I'm not sure I even understood what command skills were, but they had a definition. And I was sent on a training course many months later, not about command skills, but basically an overall kind of development week. And at the end of that week, it was a really, really intensive week, great week, looking at, again, all your strengths and weaknesses. At the end of the week, you get a report and you got to sit down with a coach. And what came out after the week was that my command skills were top class. And I nearly, threw the cup of tea I had out the window, because it so frustrated me. Hey, this was the reason I'm not getting promoted, and you're telling me I'm great at it. And, I struggled to get a good answer that day. And I went to a course. It was an influencing skills course, but it may as well have been about command skills. And something clicked with me in that course. And what was happening was I was going into meetings with senior executives with a child-to-parent relationship, instead of going in like I was with my own team or my peers, which was either adult to adult, or I was the parent and the other person was the child. I was taking control. I was the adult. I was confident. I was pushing forward my opinions with presence and strength. Every time I went in front of these senior executives, who, by the way, were the decision makers about my promotion, I became the guy who went into the room saying, what do you think of this? Should we do this or should we do this? I was asking them for their advice on an area they knew nothing about, and I was the expert. And the light switch went on. You're going in as the child to the meeting. Next time, go in as at least the adult and speak to these people as if they're your peers and speak confidently about your area with recommendations and looking for support and input, but a presence that said you're going to go do this thing. And immediately I got feedback who gave credit to, I think, one of my mentors saying, hey, whatever you've done, but you seem to have fixed Tommy, whatever you've done. But it literally in my own head was a light switch, that parent-child thing. And so great for me because it was a capability I had. I just didn't realize I was acting in that way. And so again, around self-awareness, around understanding maybe your blind spots, and they may be blind spots in certain scenarios, and then in other scenarios they could be strengths, which was what happened to me. So if we just move on to the team development, and I know, Breed, you have a bit of content you could share with the team, which I think is interesting and was a huge help to me over the years.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that we worked on using Forte, and I know a lot of people on the call have had their chance to do their Forte profile. So this is Tommy's Forte profile, and the Forte measures things like decisions, interaction, pace, conformity, like attention to detail type things. So this going in the door, and you can see from this, Tommy, you did this back in 2005, and your primary strength dominant above the line, but very close to the flexible line as well. So your style is around, being in control and driving decisions. And then you wonder, like, how does that impact as a leader on your team and on, especially when you're a manager of managers, other people's teams within your organization. And we did a lot of work on team development, but I think this is a really good example of how your behavior as a manager and leader cascades to other people, sometimes without you even realizing it. And one of Tommy's teams, we'll call him Paul for this example, it's not his real name. One of Tommy's team members, who was a direct report, we also did the Forte with them, and then we saw that coming in the door, the primary bar chart is describing the variety of styles that was coming in the door. So we'd all 8 strengths in this team, and when we then went and looked at how Paul was adapting to Tommy, so this is one of the things we can do in Forte, is find out then what are you doing in your current environment. The way Paul was adapting to Tommy very much mirrored how at the same time Tommy was doing his Forte, thinking about how he was being with his boss. And you can see the intensity of the profiles once you think about how am I supposed to be in my current environment. And then when we went back to Paul's team to see how Paul's team was adapting to Paul, we can see that the whole team was shifting in the same direction that Paul was when he thought about Tommy, and that Tommy was when he thought about his boss. So one of the takeaways in terms of team development that Tommy, you and I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about, and I know you often reached for this kind of data when you got a new team. But one of the things I suppose that we would coach around leadership in teams is realizing constantly it's not what you say but what you do that translates to your team. And that if you understand the drivers of behavior, the drivers of successful behaviors in your team, and you know that you're doing that yourself and you understand what's needed to deliver results, then you have a better chance of aligning your team to your efforts and how that cascades down through your organization. So sometimes data can really help you see how people do their absolute best one way or another to align themselves to what they think you're doing. And that does really impact team development to a degree. So it was one of the tools, Tommy, I know you used, and maybe you can say a little bit more on what that actually meant to you as a leader.
Yeah, a couple of things. If I just go back to that boss that you had the example of, this is how I was adapting to him. And he was a relatively new boss at the time, and I had worked for someone who didn't micromanage me, kind of left me do my own thing, empowered me. And then I went to this guy who seemed to want to know every little thing I was doing every day. And I was really, really struggling to figure out, again, not only how do I get to this guy's right-hand man, but God, how do I make sure I don't get fired here? This thing isn't going the way I want it to go. And we used this profile and the profile of my boss at the time. And Breed actually said, the great thing about this guy is he's very, very predictable and consistent. So you don't have to second guess what his style is. Once you figure it out, this is actually going to be really easy for you. And so what I ended up realizing was the big breakthrough with him was if you don't tell him what you're working on, he's assuming you're working on nothing. So all I had to do was just keep him engaged with the smallest of things, once, twice, 3 times a day. Hey, working on this, or forwarding a great, customer feedback or whatever. And this guy all of a sudden flipped really, really quickly. On the team dynamics, again, bringing this back to home to promotion for you. As a manager, your opportunity to get promoted is all about, the outcomes as well as what you're doing yourself on self-development. The outcomes you achieve, you can achieve far more when your team is aligned to those priorities, everyone rowing in the same direction. And so when you see the profile, I think on the next page, you can see how the teams were adapting to the style of this particular leader. He was adapting to me and I was adapting to my boss. And so we weren't wasting an ounce of energy going off in different tangents. We were fully aligned with our approach and style of how we wanted to operate. And Forte helped show that up. And also you can get down to, individual levels where you can see, well, 7 out of the 8 people on the team are making this adjustment, but there's one person who's going the other way. I need to go and sit down and have a chat about it with them. I'm wondering what they're thinking. And I can remember doing that with one individual, and they said to me, you know what, Tommy, I'm really having second thoughts about whether this kind of large corporate environment is the place for me. I've been thinking about going to the third world to help some people out there and go live there for a few years. And I just thought, wow, that Forte picked up that. I probably would never have known to even ask the question. And that's great. And I was kind of going, great, you kind of know what you want to do. Brilliant. It's on your goal map. So go do it with our blessing. And then some people, will open up and you get to bring them back on board. And great thing about this is, it's adapting all of the time. And so you can see the outliers. If someone has changed over a short period of time, again, you can jump on board and maybe you've done something to them that they're not quite happy with, but you can have that open conversation. So Forte to me was just invaluable throughout my career with all of my teams. I've used it, and also to help me with achieving that thing about getting my boss to be a big advocate for my career.
Great, super. Thank you, Tommy. So look, folks, we're coming towards the end. If anybody has a last minute question they want to pose, or they can also email me separately and I can pass it on, Tommy, to you, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
I'm going to make this available to people who've joined the call, but there's a great presentation done by Carla Harris, Vice Chairman and MD of Morgan Stanley, a keynote at LinkedIn, talking as well to these points that Tommy has shared with us particularly around the promotional, understanding the promotional game. And also LinkedIn do great learning resources. If you get into LinkedIn Learning and put in career path planning, career management, they've got some excellent, very short courses for you to access, and I really highly recommend those. So look, as promised, anyone on this call who heads over to our LinkedIn Forte page and follows us on the Forte page will get a complimentary link to our 13-page report. You might be a while since you've done one, or you might like to do a fresh adapting update. So we'd love to give you the chance to do that. If you follow us on LinkedIn, we'll see that and we'll follow up with a complimentary link to do your own communication strength survey. So Tommy, thank you so much. That is invaluable to hear it from both sides, from someone who's worked their way up and had the highs and lows to someone who now makes a lot of decisions about people's careers. And it's been a real pleasure to have you on the call with us. So on behalf of everyone, I want to say thank you so much. And again, anybody who'd like to ask a question, feel free. We'll just leave the line open there for another minute or two. And wishing you all a great day today. Tommy, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Breed, for the opportunity, and also to everyone who came on. Hopefully a couple of points might have resonated with you and given you a trigger for the next step. And hopefully your careers go from strength to strength. I'm sure they are. First step, actually, I think you see with key talent people is they go seek out things like this to go develop themselves. And so I think you're already well on the way. So thank you very, very much for the time. A pleasure. And again, feel free, Breed, if you want to give my email address out as well. Happy if anyone would like to follow up afterwards. I would be more than happy to have, a half an hour discussion like we talked about earlier. No problem at all. So great to talk to you today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.